Welcome, everyone, to our next session on a greener future for cryptocurrencies, question mark. I'm Vijay Vaidiswaran, senior editor at The Economist, and it's my great pleasure to have with me three distinguished and tech-savvy experts who are going to take us through this topic. It's a hot topic, but one that's fraught with misinformation and hyperbole. When we want to get to the real story here, of course, I want to remind everyone that we're here under Chatham House rules. And without further ado, let me introduce my panelists. Sheila Warren, who's deputy head for the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and head of data policy, blockchain, and digital assets at the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Sheila. We have with us Jesse Morris, Chief Commercial Officer at the Energy Web Foundation. Welcome, Jesse. Glad to have you with us. And Monica Long, General Manager at Ripple X. Monica, great to have you. I think we have a real brain trust from the Bay Area joining us for our global audience, so we're very fortunate to have you. Let me jump into it first. Sheila, can you help us sketch a picture of what is the right way to frame this question? Obviously, there's been a huge amount of attention paid to the issue of the environmental impact of various cryptocurrencies and even the broader move towards a blockchain-based economy. Elon Musk used this as an excuse or an explanation or a reason to talk about his company's recent stepping back from Bitcoin. That seemed an odd thing to say. It was no more environmentally impactful 1 week after he'd made the decision to buy Bitcoin than 1 week before. But regardless, but it certainly put it out in the headlines as an issue that's front and center for people who don't follow cryptocurrencies. What's the right way to frame this issue in your opinion?
Well, thank you, Vijay, for the question. I just think it's so important to think about the context in which all of this is happening. And so the environmental concerns that have been raised around crypto and Bitcoin specifically are not new to the crypto community. They're in fact conversations that have been happening certainly since I entered the space and really since the very beginning of this space began, when the social white paper was even written about Bitcoin. These were concerns that were known concerns. There are also things that various actors in the community and parts of the ecosystem have been addressing and have been trying to remedy or rectify over the course of time. So the explosion of this topic onto the scene does not in any way mean that it is a new topic. It just means it's kind of the new place, the new almost fad, if you will, way of criticizing cryptocurrencies. I think we began in the early days with the criminal activity criticism, like this is only criminal money and this and that. And that doesn't really hold up anymore because you've had so much outpouring of institutional investment from people who are pretty careful with their money and known to be into this space. So this is kind of the newest, I think, level of criticism that's coming forward. Now, I also think you mentioned Elon. It's important to note this is a time when we had a huge bull run. We had a lot of activity in this space. We had a lot going on. And so some see this as kind of one of the ways that you're seeing a bit of a pullback or maybe even a correction in what's going on. It remains a relatively new asset class. And so it does merit and behoove us to be thinking very hard about what are the downsides of it, what are the challenges, et cetera. So I just think that context is really important to note. Not new, known information a lot here. The thing that's fascinating is the confluence of ESG as well. As that becomes more important to investors, how does that translate?
So not new, not unknown, but clearly more attention will be paid, especially by the new class of investors who are primed to ask these sorts of questions. We need to get some good answers. And to that, let me turn to Jesse. Jesse, of course, you're at the Energy Web Foundation. You've dug deep into this issue. Can you give us a snapshot of what is the right way to think about the environmental profile of cryptocurrencies? I've seen, for example, analyses published. And again, Sheila's point is well taken in terms of context and how you compare things. What are you comparing it to? But headlines have been made by reports suggesting that cryptocurrencies use the energy equivalent of Argentina or Ukraine. All by themselves, the crypto economy would be the 29th biggest energy guzzler on Earth as a country. We see these sorts of apples and iPhone comparisons, or actually those are both Apple products. Apples and oranges. I'll stick with the simple one. Things that are from different categories. But if you were to go back to the data and give a meaningful assessment, what's the right way to think about the energy use, and then we can talk as the next derivative, the environmental impact of crypto.
Certainly. So one of the most important things I think to start with is not trying to say we don't have a challenge to be overcome here, right? And that is that this industry, like many other technology intensive industries, whether we're talking about cloud computing, artificial intelligence, you name it, uses a lot of electricity, right? The estimates are quite scattered, right? If you look at the crypto sector as a whole, I would give a big range between 1 and 200 terawatt hours per year, majority of that being certainly Bitcoin. That would be the other thing, I guess, just in terms of
That's a
setting
huge gap,
context.
Jesse. That's a huge range.
Well, and I could give you an even bigger range between 10 and 200 terawatt hours. So one of the pieces here is there's an immense amount of disagreement amongst a lot within the crypto community about how do you measure the energy intensity of cryptocurrency networks. And actually we can get to that with some of the work we're doing with a number of different partners on this project called the Crypto Climate Accord to change that, to basically go beyond survey data and begin measuring from the bottom up how much electricity actually is flowing through entire blockchains. So that's one thing that I think we'll talk about a bit in this conversation. But
yeah,
I think
we'll get to that in a moment.
There,
but yeah, let's come back to your initial point, please.
Again, just in terms of setting the stage. So there really are there are a lot of different blockchains out there, right, supporting all these different cryptocurrencies. And there are different, if we look at the crypto industry as a whole, certainly there are different places that electricity are being used. When Monica or myself or other market participants are flying around using planes to go to places, well, post-COVID potentially, that is a carbon footprint. The lion's share of carbon coming from the cryptocurrency industry is from the blockchains underpinning these cryptocurrencies themselves. Within those blockchains, right, there are thousands of different blockchains out there. An increasing number of those are using more efficient consensus mechanisms, meaning that there isn't as much of an electricity consumption issue. I know Monica and the Ripple crew do a lot of work on the XRP ledger. Our team at EnergyWeb works on a blockchain called the EnergyWeb chain. Both of those blockchains have a much more efficient consensus mechanism. They use the same amount of electricity as a medium-sized office building, not a medium-sized country, right? And that trend is happening throughout crypto. Lots of different blockchains are moving to more efficient consensus mechanisms, Ethereum being the one that is most under the spotlight right now for its transition away from proof of work to proof of stake. Bitcoin is certainly the largest, the elephant or the whale, to use crypto language, in the room, right? And that is where, certainly from Energy website, we see the big opportunity to address the carbon issue around crypto.
I'm going to come to you in a moment, Monica, but just to sort of round out this point in terms of specking out the size of the problem. I take your point, Jesse, that more efficient ways of conducting business is one way to reduce the energy footprint. Understood. And we'll get eventually into the renewables and some of the other how you get the energy questions that are being worked on. But in terms of how big a problem is it, that's really the foundational question. And what are we comparing it against? What's the latest thinking on how big a footprint does the crypto economy have in terms of energy consumption? Is there a problem here? Because I can remember a couple of decades ago, people saying, oh my God, the internet, how many coal plants have to go up and server farms. We all remember this sort of argument being made in Forbes and other places that the internet's going to blow up the world energy landscape. And that turned out not to be true, in part because it did not take account of displacement of other things like travel or driving to the shopping mall that e-commerce would displace. And so it was a more complicated calculation with offsets and so on. And in that way, if we're talking about digital currencies, just to take an example, what about all the pennies that are minted, the mining of the nickel and the copper and the shipment of currency? In other words, if we were to really look at the payment systems in the whole, the current rails, what kind of energy does it take for current payment providers? Is there a state-of-the-art study, Sheila, maybe by the World Economic Forum or others, where we could get some idea of, is this a small problem or is this a massive problem, the biggest energy problem in the space kind of problem? Can someone spec it out for me?
I'm certainly happy to tell you. I think, as Jesse indicated, there's just not agreement on how you measure and what goes into that calculation. So there are a number of different studies. I think all of them I would call high quality, but they're very contextualized. Some look only at mining and proof of work in Bitcoin. Some try to look across the entire crypto industry, which is hard to do because there isn't even agreement on where the boundaries of that industry are. And so I want to push back a bit, Vijay, because I think that all these comparisons to me seem like apples and zucchini. I mean, just the way you couldn't really compare the internet to something else, you really can't compare the crypto ecosystem to something else. There isn't anything else like it. And this is all predicated, I think, on the assumption that you might make the whole thing vanish, which I think is just fundamentally flawed. I think this is here to stay. And so the question to me is, how do we do better? How do we create a sustainable, inclusive crypto ecosystem, as opposed to let's compare it to something else and then what? We assume the whole thing vanishes. That just doesn't seem very likely to me. So I tend to think that our attention is better spent not so much on what are we comparing it to, and is it gold mines, or is it the financial rails, or what is it, or is it Argentina's economy, or whatever it is? Because none of those things really make sense to me. It's really more, let's take what we're doing, let's do it the best that we can, because we can certainly do better. And so I think you've seen some efforts that I find to be, frankly, more productive use of time that are focused on how do we make sure that we are incentivizing the use of renewables, for example. We're thinking about things like decarbonization, right? These kinds of efforts. And I think that's similar to what you see in the regular ESG space, right? I think that's important to frame.
My effort to go from apples to zucchini to apples is not going to succeed at this call, but I do see your point. You see apples and you want to make apple pie, and so that's a defensible position. Monica, thank you for your patience. Let's turn to you. Can you give me your perspective on our fruity debate today?
Absolutely. I'll agree with a lot of what Sheila and Jesse have laid out. We are here because we believe that cryptocurrency and the underlying blockchains will be the future of finance. This is the future of money. And so how do we work toward a greener, more sustainable future, which actually I think aligns very well with the core values, or the commonly shared values of the crypto industry overall. What we believe in is building toward a more accessible and more inclusive financial system. And we know that climate change impacts those who can least afford to deal with the impacts of it, for example, in developing countries. So there's a lot of positive impact that we can make as an industry on financial inclusion. Let's not outweigh those benefits with negative impacts from the climate change issue. So looking ahead, working towards solutions, totally agree. We need to band together as an industry, which, we're members of the Crypto Climate Accord, along with World Economic Forum and many others, to work toward commitments to using 100% renewables by 2025. And the other point that Jesse made is there are green cryptos today. There's the federated consensus mechanism that XRP Ledger uses. There's proof of stake. And these are extraordinarily more energy efficient methods of consensus. So those are some of the solutions that we're looking at.
Great. So you mentioned the Crypto Climate Accord. I want to come to Jesse in a moment, because I know Energy Web, along with RMI and some others, were foundational in that. But just to stick with you, Monica, for a moment, this is a commitment about green energy being used in the mining. But in addition to that, I think there's a transparency portion as well in reporting. Can you talk about the other dimensions of this, not simply the windmills or using flared gas, et cetera, which we can talk about in a moment? What are the other aspects of corporate commitment that you're taking on, or that you think should be important for this accord and related initiatives to take up?
Yes. I can speak to a bit of what Ripple as a company has committed to, or the steps we've taken, and then to address your broader point on reporting. So last year, we helped to decarbonize the XRP ledger, so it's a carbon neutral blockchain even today. And as a company, we've committed to being carbon neutral by 2030. In terms of the data standards and reporting, totally agree with what Jesse and Sheila have laid out, that to date, all reporting has been it's self-reporting by miners. It's on a voluntary basis. So we don't really have a alignment as an industry on what are the set of metrics we're going to use, and how are we going to gather that data in a way that's very transparent and standardized, which the great thing about blockchains is we can do that. We can achieve it. And we're seeing, I will add, and Jesse can speak to this more, a couple members of the Crypto Climate Accord, Argo and DMG mining operations, they're being proactive. They've already set up a committee to define a green hash rate.
Jesse, can you tell us, I think you were one of the founding members, along with a couple of organizations, what motivated Energy Web to to help create the Crypto Climate Accord, and what does it cover? What is the extent of the agreement that you've got? I know you've got a number of key corporate partners as well, but give us an idea of the ambition of this.
So EnergyWeb is unique. We're a nonprofit, and we build open source software to help accelerate decarbonization of many different industries, the electric grid, lots of different industries. And what's interesting is part of our open source stack is we use blockchain technology. So we really sit at this Venn diagram between crypto and energy and sustainability long before any of this conversation about the sustainability of the cryptocurrency industry was really at the fore of public attention. Because we sit at that nexus, we said, you know what? We see a real opportunity to do our best to pull together a critical mass of crypto market participants to align on a shared vision. And that's really the inspiration behind the Crypto Climate Accord, taking inspiration from the Paris Climate Agreement to basically say, well, let's not do countries, but let's do companies and organizations. So a private sector-led initiative focused on achieving a net zero cryptocurrency industry. That's the focus. What we've done to date is pull together just over 40 organizations who have stepped forward and said, we support the objectives of the Accord, we support the vision, and have also, to Monica's point, started building what we think the future could look like. So underneath the umbrella of the Accord, which again is just about decarbonizing the cryptocurrency industry, a number of different working groups have taken shape. And before that, I think a lot of the discussion, frankly, around decarbonizing crypto has gotten a bit confusing and in the weeds. But if you really step back, what the path to making the cryptocurrency green is not so different from making some of these other industries green. We know how to make green electrons. Actually, at a certain point, it's an accounting challenge and problem, right? So really, a lot of the work under the Accord is focused on helping companies in the crypto space who want to go green to connect with solution providers that can help make that happen. And then on the other side, for some of the harder challenges, as in how can we actually measure the real-time carbon footprint of the Bitcoin network, we're focused on solving those problems. So again, at the highest level, that's the focus of the Crypto Climate Accord, is to pull organizations together, agree on a shared objective, and then begin designing solutions to actually help some of those decarbonization objectives be met.
Now, I've seen some figures suggesting maybe up to 40% of total energy used for Bitcoin mining in 2019 came from renewables, up from 28% the year previously. 3/4 of miners, or at least have some renewables in the mix, although obviously in some countries, as in China, there's more coal in the grid and so on. In Iceland, obviously, it's overwhelmingly renewables. Do those, again, I know there's huge disagreement on parameters and zucchinis, but broadly speaking, does that sound like the right direction we're going in to you?
Directionally, to me, certainly. And in fact, if I tie it back to the Accord, 3 initial working groups have really emerged in the space. First working group is exactly what you just mentioned. So trying to get some sort of a open source agreed upon standard framework for calculating the carbon intensity of these cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin. So that's one of the working groups we're focused on. The second one is then using that baseline information to help corporates and other market participants take near-term action. And specifically, this is quite simple. If you look at the companies that already have strong sustainability mandates to clean up their supply chain and for them to be using 100% clean electricity, there are a variety of products in the market that companies are purchasing right now to make their supply chains green. They purchase renewables, either through some more sophisticated products, things called power purchase agreements, or just purchasing renewable energy certificates. We can apply those same products to the crypto space. So this other working group is focused on that, helping either large crypto holders, exchanges, or some miners purchase renewables to clean up either the cryptocurrency they hold on their balance sheet or the ones that they're producing. So that's more of a near-term working group. The final one that I do want to mention, because I think this is where the real transformative potential is for us to not only decarbonize crypto, but also have the crypto industry act as a model for the rest of the world, is Monica already mentioned it. What about being able to create a green hash rate for the Bitcoin network? What if we had verified close to real-time information all the way down from the bottom up from miners, where we were actually able to see, okay, where is that mining taking place? What is the grid mix at that moment in time? So that we can actually see how much green or not electricity is being used to power the network as a starting point for decarbonizing the whole thing. So that working group, that green hash rate, is the third piece that we're focused on right now.
If that were to
Yeah,
take
and I
off,
want
Sheila, coming to you next. Please continue. But where I wanted to make the bridge is, I know you were keen to talk about the linkage to the broader ESG world. If we were to able to get these kinds of verifications, what matters gets measured, what's measured is managed, and if we can get that authentication, how much would it help for ESG investors? Can you help us understand the bigger picture, especially with the powerful force of financial flows from ESG now?
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go. So thank you for asking. I think I tend to look at kind of the automotive industry as sort of a marker because we focus a lot and very narrowly in our rhetoric on the environmental consequences and implications. And so when we saw the move, to hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, there's no question that these are greener. This is a green movement. We're trying to kind of get things to a better place for sustainability environmentally. And not, club baby seals and boil the oceans, right? A similar thing I think is happening in the crypto industry, and part of the work that Jesse's spearheading here is, of course, leading in that direction. But I think it's important to connect that to the broader movement, both socially and in terms of governance. And one thing that I think gets underreported in this space is the novel forms of governance that cryptocurrencies and the blockchain technology underlying them can provide. Just the sheer transparency and accountability in these systems and the way that some of these voting mechanisms, you want to call them, that are governance mechanisms, as we call them in the space, really work, provides a little bit more of stake, and I mean that in kind of the more traditional sense of the word, than you have in a lot of other systems. And so part of what is really powerful about these technologies is that they are decentralized to a varying or greater or lesser degree. And so what that means is you can create a really powerful economic model that can more effectively, equitably, fairly, inclusively distribute the risk and reward across a broader variety of stakeholders. And I think, as you saw, the move to greener vehicles didn't just result in greener vehicles. There was a lot of offshoot of that. There was a lot of context around how you thought about new factories and how you thought about the workforce and how you thought about job reskilling. All these things are really important. There's an opportunity, if we connect it properly, to think about, particularly post-pandemic, how do we create these new social opportunities, particularly in parts of the world that might have non-arable land that can house renewable grids, like things like this? How do we think about decentralizing the grid in a way that could actually be very powerful? So we are bringing together a group we're calling the Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator. We're working with Jesse and the Crypto Climate Accord on this as well, and a bunch of others. We're going to be launching this in the fall. And it's really focusing on these connections between the E, the S, and the G. The environmental work, the social work, and of course, grounding all of this in the unique models of governance that this technology can provide.
Wonder what, Monica, if I could ask for your perspective. This is a powerful point we've heard just now from Sheila, linking what seems ostensibly to be a question of energy and environment, right? That's where we started with this, but connecting it to various stakeholder issues. And in particular, one of the big challenges of today, of course, is inequality, looking for inclusion. There has been the argument that fintech in and of itself can act as a tool for greater financial inclusion than traditional banking payments methods, which have tended to have an exclusionary impact on those at the bottom. What do you think about this at Ripple? What is your perspective on inclusion, inequity, and the role that the new technologies can play? And where do we go with this argument or this way of looking at it?
Yes. And I think Sheila in the work at the World Economic Forum is so important, as she said, to connect the E, S, and G through the industry. I go back to, for many, and I won't say all, but certainly that there's a commonly shared mission for lots of participants in crypto, where we've seen a promise of a more accessible and more inclusive financial system of the future. That's the decentralized principles of the blockchains and the cryptocurrencies themselves. That's really what it unlocks at the end of the day, is modernizing financial infrastructure and making it more accessible and inclusive. And so that is why we at Ripple, we believe that looking forward at this the sustainability of the crypto systems that we're all using is important to prioritize now, so that we're not having to, we're not contributing in a negative way to the overall climate impact in the world. And as I mentioned earlier, and those at this conference know very well, those who have the least or are least able to afford dealing with the consequences of climate impact are really most affected by it. And so the sustainability issue, we really see as intricately intertwined with this shared mission we have as an industry to build toward a more inclusive future. So that's really at the heart of why we think this is an issue that we need to address today. And we've been talking a bit about, what is the size of this problem? Completely agree. It's difficult to measure. With increasing popularity and demand, it is a fact that the problem is increasing in size. So that's why we really feel urgency to get ahead of it and find solutions today, come together as an industry to work on it, instead of dealing with the consequences and reverse engineering in the future.
And joining a group like the CCA and so on, the Climate Accord, presumably you wanted to avoid the free rider problem, right? This is something where your firm would benefit, as would others, from working together, getting others on board as well. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned some of the things the measures we took last year, making a company commitment to reduce the size of our carbon footprint, and setting some milestones against that. Also contributing to decarbonizing the XRP ledger, which through the process of that we co-developed an open source tool with Energy Web called EW0. So any blockchain can easily use that tool to decarbonize or help to decarbonize a chain. But this really has to be an industry-wide effort. We need to band together to make that really sizable impact. Any one player acting alone won't really affect the outcome of the future.
And building upon these points, just building upon these points, if I might, I really do see this tying together everything about the broader ESG piece and cryptocurrency industry. There is an opportunity here for the crypto industry to lead the world. And to explain that, just for a moment, for anybody at the conference that has done this, when you go to buy renewables today as a small size business, for example, you pick up the phone, you call a broker. That broker, you have to trust that they have a portfolio of renewables that they have behind them. And then you pay them some fiat money. And then you get a PDF that says, look, you've bought some certificates from, trust us, it's all there. Woo, I'm green. Thank you very much. Right? Now, there are more sophisticated instruments in that in some places in the world, but generally speaking, that is the process for purchasing renewables right now. Now, juxtapose that with the way that crypto works, right? Every single person on the planet could have an address. They could have a public-private key pair that they control and that they own, and that is their identity they're in control of. You can see where that person is, detailed information about their background and their history in a privacy-preserving way. The amount of innovative technologies that compiled under the cryptocurrency umbrella that we have access to, we can overlay those on the energy sector. Imagine if, as Monica just described, you wanted to go and buy renewables and you were able to go shopping for renewables globally and look for very specific individual wind and solar farms with specific attributes, and then purchase renewables from those assets and have those renewables be tracked on a blockchain so that you know with confidence that you actually purchased those renewables to offset your cryptocurrency's footprint. So those are the kinds of business transactions that we can facilitate using blockchain technology that are a far cry and a massive improvement upon the current process of purchasing renewables. So that's the opportunity I see well beyond decarbonizing crypto. We need to do it, but we can also decarbonize crypto and show the rest of the world what digital forward decarbonization looks like.
Yeah, see, that's a beautiful vision. What are the obstacles to that? Or what do you need for that to happen? Is it a 5-year vision? Do you need regulation to make it happen? Can it be done through public-private partnerships or private sector bottom-up initiatives? In practical terms, give me the next 3 years on how we get closer to that vision.
The technologies, I'm not a technologist. I'm a climate and energy guy, and I've learned about crypto in the past 4 years and open source technologies more general. But if there's one thing I've observed in those 4 years, it's that this is probably not a technology problem. Everything I just described in that vision of having a specific facility to be able to be trusted and have a digital representation that's connected to a blockchain, that all exists today. And there's plenty of different renewable energy technologies out there that can pump out clean electricity. I think it's a human and organizational challenge. How are we going to convince, for example, Bitcoin mining pools and individuals in China to step forward and engage with this? So I think the primary barriers in the next look, we should be making progress on this in the next year. We're working with supporters under the Crypto Climate Accord, including Argo and DMG that Monica mentioned earlier, to actually build what I just described. So we're going to try and build it in the next couple of months to have a reference architecture out there this summer. How do we scale that to then get all these other miners on board? That's going to be a multi-year project for sure. But again, this is crypto. People like getting their hands dirty and building things. So I think the primary challenge is not going to be technological. It will be human and business to business. How can we convince these companies to come on board? And the last thing I'd say there is the only thing I think we have going for us in that respect is clearly the market has put a price on this. Clearly the market has said if crypto is going to continue to be adopted by individuals and organizations around the world, it has to be green. So I hope that would help bring some of these players to the table, but time will tell.
Sheila, what do you think of the what you've just heard, and what might need to happen in the next 3 to 5 years for the greening of crypto really to lead the decarbonization of the global economy, which is a very powerful concept?
Mm-hmm. We fully support that concept and are working towards it. I think that there's a tendency in the press to kind of equate Bitcoin and crypto. Bitcoin is a form, you could say, of crypto, or to kind of assume
not here at The Economist, of course, but I take your point.
Of course not. I mean, mainstream news outlets that will not be named. But we also kind of see this sort of assumption that crypto is a monolith, and certainly it's a niche industry in many ways. You know, there's kind of an insider kind of jargon and these kinds of things that happen. But there is a lot of factionalization within this sector, and I think that cannot be overstated. There is still a concept, I think, externally, that there will be some sort of winner-take-all that happens here. We don't personally see that. I don't agree that that's the inevitable outcome here, but there is still a sense that might be the case, because don't forget, a lot of these people are building businesses, right? And they are staking their livelihoods on these businesses being successful. And so I do think that Jesse's point is a really good one, which is that it's almost stakeholder management, it's coalition building that is going to be the biggest challenge. And I think you've seen so much of this already happening with the great work of the CCA. There's other groups that have also come together that are kind of creating some of these opportunities for competitors to work together. And of course, it's something the forum, does on a regular basis. I think that there's a danger that governments might come in here and pre-regulate, is the term I like to use, right? Like kind of assume that some of the environmental standards from other sectors apply here and just port them almost directly, stifle some of the innovation and not give industry a chance to really sort some of this out and create these metrics themselves. And so I do worry that there might be incentives created by pre-regulation or too early regulation that might skew what is possible here. So I think that's a challenge as well. We talk to a lot of governments at the forum about this and are trying to encourage kind of a very educated, almost a patient approach to this particular space, even though it is of critical importance.
You want a sandbox for this? Isn't that the popular term?
Well, sandboxes have pros and cons. So, it kind of depends on who'd be running the sandbox, who'd be in it, and what the kind of parameters around that would be, what safe harbors might exist there. I think that this is a space that is highly, highly innovative. And so anything we can do to encourage that innovation, particularly in cooperation with these different factions, is going to be the best thing we can do to ensure the outcome that we all want to see.
I want to, just because they're fun examples, talk a little bit about a couple of those examples of innovations or orthogonal developments and see if any of these have legs. We've seen examples of energy companies that are doing Bitcoin mining with excess energy. Greenridge Generation in New York is an example that's now calls itself a Bitcoin miner with a power plant attached. We've seen examples of mobile mining where vented or flared natural gas, which of course we're all quite aware of methane and its contribution to greenhouse gases acutely in the last few years, that can be used for mining. Now, are these ad hoc examples sort of tokenism and not to be taken seriously as part of the bigger solution, or is there reason to think these are the sorts of innovations that might come up and could lead to something bigger? Jesse, maybe you want to take a lead on that?
I think they all have something to contribute. Right? Are some aimed at a nice marketing announcement to avoid the amount of negative press that crypto is getting in some cases? Sure. But a lot of these solutions they're not, they're real, right? Being able to move a Bitcoin mining unit to places in the world where renewable energy is otherwise going to be curtailed is very smart, right? There are hundreds of terawatt hours, massive amounts of electricity that are dumped into the ground in places like Inner Mongolia, in Asia, and other even places here in the United States. Why not take that electricity and put it to a productive use, right? So I'm personally very bullish on those kinds of use cases. And even some of these other flare gas, I know a number of the mining organizations under the Crypto Climate Accord are in deep discussion there. Again, if it can be verifiably proven to have used electricity for a beneficial use or reduce the carbon footprint of a given area, yes, we should be supporting it. So yes, I think they do all add up to something.
Sheila, any thought on this from your vantage point?
Yeah, I tend to be in favor of more innovation at this point in time. I certainly wouldn't comment on any of the specific examples that you gave, but I do think these kinds of examples and these kinds of experiments are really important. And I think what's going to really be the most powerful is picking up some of these, amplifying them, scaling them, extending them, but also making the case. And it's making the case not just to investors, and that's kind of already coming with ESG frameworks being things that they are very, very, as Jesse noted, a clear market signal, making the case to industry, making the case to governments, making the case to all kinds of other actors that this is the important direction and that we need to accommodate at a minimum some of these experiments to see what works and what doesn't. And not all of them will succeed, but certainly some of them will. And those are the ones we want to make sure we're prepared to then take forward in other parts of the world, or think about how we can extend them.
We're just getting close to the end of our time together. I want to pivot to the future, if that's all right, and give each of you a chance to take on a forward-looking question. At the moment, we convened this session because there are significant challenges, or at least concerns, expressed about the environmental dimensions of a crypto-powered future. If we were to reconvene this panel in 10 years, what do you think would be the most important issue that's a challenge for the crypto industry? And maybe we'll start with you, Monica. Do you think it'll still be grappling with these environmental issues, or do you foresee a different set of issues? And we'll go in turn.
I'm optimistic about the industry. I do think there's been, Sheila mentioned at the very top of this session that the sustainability questions around cryptocurrency has been around since the dawn of Bitcoin, but there's definitely more urgency, more of a spotlight on them today. And so with that, we're seeing more action across the industry. So I'm a believer, I'm optimistic that we're going to get in front of this. We're going to get more ahead of it as an industry, with many stakeholders banding together. There's just lots of positive developments we're reading about week to week on this. So I think the other data point I'll throw out is with Ethereum's move to proof of stake, now 40% of blockchains are using more energy efficient mechanisms than proof of work. So this is an industry that's all about technological innovation. So I think it's going to point that direction. The types of challenges that we're facing 10 years from now, I certainly hope to see us in a place where, as an industry, crypto has really taken root in terms of mass adoption beyond the investment use case, the store of value use case, but really being used broadly as new payment rails, new mechanisms for payments and lending, a new financial system, and that we're facing more user-based obstacles related to growth.
So challenges related to being too successful, not successful enough. It sounds a bit like when you ask the candidate at an interview, what's your worst flaw? They say, well, I'm a perfectionist. It's a real problem for me. But fair enough. I'll let you get away with that. Jesse, how about you? 10 years from now, what do you think will be the biggest challenge to the industry? Will it still be the green stuff?
The cryptocurrency industry, by comparison to other hard to decarbonize sectors, if we can't decarbonize by 2030, we're in trouble. So I'd say absolutely, crypto needs to be 100% renewable by 2030, full stop. And if we haven't done that, then the rest of the planet's really going to be off the rails on all these other sectors that are much, much harder to decarbonize. So that'd be my first reaction. What are we going to be talking about? That's 10 years in crypto speak is 1,000 years, right? I think we're going to be arguing about data sovereignty. I think we're going to be arguing about still at that point, human rights to digital identity and self-sovereignty of data. That should be what we're talking about, not whether or not the grid is green, the power of cryptocurrency. We should have that licked.
Great. Okay. Sheila, last word goes to you.
Thank you. I absolutely agree that if we we will not be talking about green energy and crypto anymore. Then we'll have solved it. I just think that's the only option. There's so much attention being paid to this right now, and I'm very confident we'll come up with solutions that make a lot of sense, the way we've done in other industries in the past. So that I think will be off the table, or kind of a historical mention or footnote. I agree with Jesse. I think that we're going to be seeing the underlying technology that sits underneath crypto and powers crypto used in all kinds of spaces. We didn't talk about, and I'm grateful for it, NFTs, which were a month ago. That was all anybody was talking about before. It was, energy, right? It'll be something else next week. I mean, who knows? It just changes so much in this space. To Jesse's point, crypto time, we call it. But I do think that there's going to be a whole new industry that springs up around this technology. And we can't even imagine the way that when the internet started, we couldn't imagine social media, right? There's going to be so many things that occur, and there's going to be problems that come there. There's just like we're seeing centralized platforms and the issues around data and all of that. There'll be some new set of problems that emerge with this new set of businesses, and we'll be tackling that and how we can ensure that human rights are at the center of everything that we do.
Great. So not the green problem, but another set of problems associated with growth. I will give my 2 cents for what it's worth. I don't think we'll be talking about the greenness of crypto. I think by 2030, Elon Musk will have set up remote mining operations on Mars, and we'll be wondering about the redness of crypto. That'll be our challenge. I'll put it out there as my closing provocation. It's only slightly tongue-in-cheek. Let me thank you, our expert panel, for joining us. Fantastic insights. We're really very grateful. And also thank you to our audience. Please join us for the next session, which will join shortly. Goodbye.